Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining and listening to this week's episode of the Admit One podcast, where we interview students who have successfully navigated the college admission process and earned their ticket to college. This week, we're excited to talk to Rita, who's a senior at North Allegheny Senior High School in Pennsylvania. Rita has recently been admitted to the University of Pennsylvania, where she will be studying neuroscience and be on the pre-med track at UPenn. So Rita, thanks so much for joining us today and talking a little bit about your journey through the admission process, and then also being able to share some pieces of wisdom that you learned as you navigated that process. So thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, of course. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So yeah, I usually like to start just by getting a little bit of an understanding from your perspective of tell me a little bit about your hometown. Tell me a little bit about your high school. What kind of school do you go to? What type of town do you live in? And then we can kind of take the conversation from there.
Yeah, so I live in the suburbs, around Pittsburgh, around the city of Pittsburgh. And my school, it's a pretty big school. North Allegheny has a graduating class of about 670 people. So I'm pretty used to a bigger school. I do tend to talk to the same people every year though, because of the classes that I take. And Pittsburgh, it's a pretty big area. There are a lot of schools around here, and my school is always in competition with most of the schools around here. So it's a pretty harsh atmosphere sometimes. It's very competitive around here. But
and would you say your high school would you say is competitive, like your peer group and stuff like that, or how would you describe that?
Yeah, so the atmosphere in the school itself is also pretty competitive. There's kind of an incentive to take as many APs as possible, and especially if you're aiming for top schools like Ivy Leagues or other top schools, most people try to collect APs at my school.
Okay. So tell me a little, so let's start there, because I always think that's kind of an interesting topic of conversation. So when you start high school, right, is that something that you're cognizant of? Are you starting to think right away, how can I get as many APs? And then the other question I would have to that is, in your mind, was it collecting APs, or was it the rigor of the curriculum as a whole?
So I actually moved here in 6th grade from Europe. So I kind of had no idea how the American education system worked. By the time 8th grade rolled around, I still didn't really know what APs were.
It's very different in Europe than it is in America.
Yeah, the whole system was super different. So
Yeah,
personally,
exactly.
I didn't know what I wanted to do, but a lot of people here with older siblings definitely had advice from their siblings to start with these specific classes, and then sort of follow a track to take a lot of APs. But for me, my 8th grade English teacher would not let me waive up to honors English. So I did take an academic class in 9th grade. And after that, it wasn't so much collecting APs as what I liked that would fit into my schedule that were also APs.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about that. Did you, as you're in 8th, 9th grade, beginning high school, did you have an idea of what you not necessarily want to major in or do for a career, but did you know you like science? Did you what was sort of the thought process that you had there?
So the two things that I really liked were science and writing. So in 9th grade, you're not allowed to take any APs at my school, but starting 10th grade, you are. So I took AP Hug and AP Calc BC. Calc because I had skipped a couple years of math moving here. And Hug because I was told that you write a research essay in it, and that the free response, I guess, of the AP test is a lot of writing. So that kind of incentivized me to take Hug. After that, I sort of figured that social studies just wasn't my thing.
Okay.
So
didn't do it.
Yeah, no. So I did start taking more specialized math and science classes after that.
And so from a math track standpoint, what does the trajectory look for you? What are your math classes at each year?
So in 9th grade, I took honors pre-calc. In 10th grade, it was AP Calc BC. And then
are you by far the youngest person in that class?
Actually, no, we have 8th graders in AP Calc BC.
Really? All right. That's crazy. Yeah, that's wild. Okay.
I'm pretty sure my school's not allowed to do that, but we do it.
Yeah, I think it's frowned upon. Yeah.
Yeah. But then junior year was AP Stats, and senior year it was honors linear algebra.
Okay. And are you taking that like at a community college? Are you taking that online? How do you take linear algebra? Is it through your high
It's a
school?
class offered through my school.
If they're offering AP Calc to eighth graders, then yeah, I think they
Yeah.
probably need to also have linear algebra. Yeah, I mean that's pretty rare. I'd say most students, if they're taking Calc BC as a sophomore, you're like well advanced from a math standpoint.
Mhm.
But you'll see for most students that we've talked to, the math track is really important.
Yeah.
And it does make a pretty significant difference in, especially if you're looking at like STEM focused classes.
Yeah.
And sometimes people think like when I tell them, you want to get to linear algebra by the time you graduate, they look at me like I have three heads. But the reality is like there's a lot of kids who are doing that, and those
Yeah.
kids end up at some of the strongest schools and programs and things like that. So the math track, the classes that you take in grades 7 and 8 from a math standpoint can dictate the classes that you
Mhm.
take in grades 11 and 12, which is really important. Um,
Yeah, I
okay, cool.
wasn't
And
super convinced on linear algebra either, but I did go through Accept You, and my counselor was like, "You
made
should
the made
probably
the
try it."
made the decision and
Yeah.
to give it a go. Yeah, I
Uh-huh.
don't think anybody's like dying to take it as a senior, but
No,
it does
not
make
really.
sense. Yeah, exactly.
But I didn't make my senior schedule very easy either, like even
Tell me a
without.
little bit about like what does your senior schedule look like?
So started off the day strong with AP Physics.
Okay, that's a
And
fresh start.
then,
Yep.
yeah, right. And then my second period was AP Econ. My school does macro and micro in 1 year, so like it's just like a semester of macro and a semester of micro. So we take
Hmm.
both the AP tests at the end of
Yep.
the year. And then I had linear algebra, then AP French, then I had honors organic chemistry, AP Lit, and a choir class. So I didn't
Okay.
make it super easy, but it ended up
No.
being like okay.
Yeah. And then tell me a little bit about like outside of the classroom. What are some of the things that you're most involved with and you feel like most proud of? And also like we could talk a little bit as we move, but like what's kind of the trajectory of your involvement in those things?
Yeah. So since seventh grade, I've been on the rowing team. Not my school's; it was a club rowing team. Um, I spent pretty much every day after school there. Um, so like I think I rowed until like senior year kind of started, and then application season started, and then
Hmm.
it became like too much because at some point I also started research. So wanting to become a doctor kind of entailed research like over the last 2 years.
Yep.
So my research was personally on PTSD and potential genetic underpinnings of it.
Hmm.
And that really helped in the sense of like trying to figure out a major. I'm considering neuroscience now mainly because I did research on PTSD.
Hmm.
And the other form of research that I did was about how music affects brain health. So that's kind of like tying into my other passion, music. If
Hmm.
you look at my resume, like the entire thing is just music. Um, so I've gone to like district, region, state, and national levels for choir. I have been learning Hindustani and Carnatic music, which are both Indian traditional music,
Hmm.
um, since like elementary school.
Hmm.
And I've participated in several like showcases and competitions and everything. Yeah, so most of my resume is music, and to continue with that, like I've also recorded my own songs. Some of them are on Spotify.
Hmm. Cool.
And I'm thinking I'm going to keep doing that, like writing and composing as like a hobby. I'm not sure it's going to play a huge role in my like career as a doctor
Hmm.
unless it comes into my research again.
Sure.
So if I continue like music and brain health research, that would be great.
I mean, it's a great way to like merge things, and whether
Mhm.
you decide to do that for the rest of your career or not, like kind of irrelevant. But when you're from a high school standpoint, like what you're really trying to do is connect the dots a little bit and
Mhm.
say, I love music, but then when you think about it, like there's, thousands of kids who love music. So how can I do that thing in a different way? And so to
Yeah.
then connect it to like your interest in research, I think is a great way
Mhm.
to leverage those, two different fields. I want to go back a little bit to like talk to me a little bit about the idea of research. When did that kind of like come on to your radar? Like, what is the plan for like I'll have students that'll say like, okay, I want to get into a lab. I'm like, well, you have no skills. So, you're 14, 15. If you email a professor, they're going to be like, no, there's other
Yeah.
things. So,
Yeah.
so talk to me a little bit about like, how do you get into research? How do you start building that out? How do you get into your own research? Like, what does that all look like for a high school student?
Yeah. So in the summer after 10th grade, I participated in a program called UPSCA. It's a program at the University of Pittsburgh where we stayed on campus for a month and kind of got lectures from several different kinds of doctors. It was more like a camp that kind of told you about how like being a doctor eventually works out, depending on whatever specialty you choose. Part of that camp was also you had to do your own research and write an essay for like about 10 to 15 pages, like not a huge research essay, but a research essay. And the topic I chose for that was the music and brain health. So within the University of Pittsburgh, they gave us access to their libraries and databases. So I was able to find like prior research. This wasn't any like lab research or anything. It was more just like looking at pre-existing MRI data and like reading pre-existing research papers about this topic to see like what I could join together to come up with my own research.
And that's an important piece for students, is that, that's the skill building, right? So like when if you want to do any research, there's going to be, you have to understand the literature, understand where the field is. And so, you're not just going to dive in and say, okay, now I'm going to find a cure for cancer tomorrow. Like there's got to be development of that over the course of time. So the fact that you're doing it, like literature reviews, you're understanding the field, that's what the skill building is that we talk about a lot.
Yeah, I think like the most important part of like starting out research is being able to understand like what these really overwhelming research papers consist of, and then being able to like put that into your own words and understand it for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's dense. So like, you had to go through and understand how to read those things, how to navigate it. Okay, cool. So that's great. So then you start kind of moving through that. And then what's kind of the next step for you from a research standpoint?
So the next step was the next summer, I met with a tutor from Princeton. Not a tutor, a mentor from Princeton. And she helped me write another review paper. This one was about the PTSD and genetics. Personally, I haven't done much work in a lab or anything, but my research with like the review paper I started writing with PTSD and genetics kind of tied into another thing I was doing like that summer. It was the summer after junior year, which was an internship at the Veterans Hospital in Pittsburgh. And that kind of like it tied together because I got to see firsthand how PTSD affected veterans in the first place because of their war experience. And I feel like that really helped me understand PTSD as a whole. And then I was looking for genes that could be targeted to reduce the effects of PTSD on veterans, on people who are affected by it. So being able to like understand the disease itself gave me more of a better viewpoint to start looking at like specific like parts of the disease I could target.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I think that's like, that to me makes a lot of sense of like, as from a college standpoint. And again, going back to the idea that students feel like I want to get in a lab. And I understand that. I'm not trying to like, say that that's irrational or anything, but there is so much that you can do without necessarily getting into a lab and being able to explore your interests and start to think critically about like, okay, once I do get to college, what is that going to look like and how am I going to build upon that? And we'll talk about it a little bit when we get to going through some of your essays, because you do a good job of saying like, here's what I did, and then this is how I want to utilize it when I go to college, and specifically at the University of Pennsylvania, which is great. And then talk to me a little bit about like your involvement with music, because that's a big piece of your main essay. That's kind of the theme of your main essay, which we'll look at. But talk to me a little bit about like the role that music played throughout your life. And then also we'll pull up the essay here in a second. But like what made you decide like this is what I want the theme of my essay overall to be? How did that kind of take shape?
Yeah, so music as a whole has been kind of like the anchor of my life. Like everything comes back to music. I can like math in school, but I'm not going to come home and want to do math.
Sure.
But I can sing at school, like in choir class, and I'll come home and I still want to sing. And I've always like I've never been the best at like expressing my myself through speaking,
Hmm.
but writing songs really helps me express myself. So it's
Hmm.
always been like kind of like an outlet, a creative outlet. And it's just been, though it connects to a few things in my life, like how it connected to research and like how I used it in the essay.
Yep.
It's still like a separate stress relief from
Yeah.
everything else.
Okay, cool.
So it's kind of just been like my passion for a very long time.
Let's pull it up and kind of talk through it a little bit
Yeah.
here, just to go through, because you do some things that are not always very easy, but I think you do them very well. Is uh, you combine a couple of different ideas or stories or experiences, which sometimes is very hard for kids because it feels isolated, and it feels like each of them are their own unique narratives. But for you, you do a really good job of kind of tying them all in. You have like a really nice opening where you talk about different chords that you play, and the feeling, emotions, and people that they kind of remind you of and bring you back to different moments, and what that all how that all kind of comes together. And then you give into some context, right? So you talk about the role that music played, and it's always been around your life at a very young age, and then there's sort of this transition as you get a little bit older into more like competitive singing, and some of the more heavier pieces that you get into.
Hmm.
um but you're touching on like all of these different elements of your life, which I think is not always the easiest thing to do, but you do a really good job about it, where you talk
Thank you.
about moving to the United States, and you talk about like your time in Switzerland, and then you get into like the process of songwriting, and then it gets into kind of the connection to your academic focus as well. So I guess my question for you would be, like, when you started putting this together, like what was the process of writing for you? Did you start with the main essay? Did you start with other like brainstorming essays? Were you like, I want to get a bunch of things in here? Like, what was kind of the thought process for you?
Hmm. Well, I remember the first time I thought about this essay was in AP Psych, like in the middle of my junior year, and we were talking about sound and how we like experience it. And I was thinking about chords specifically because, like when I hear a specific chord, there's a memory that comes with it because either because I was listening to that chord at that time, or it's just like a feeling that I get that reminds me of
Mm-hmm.
like a moment. So I thought of the intro first. Like that was my first. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
write an essay that kind of used chords in this specific way because I thought it was like creative or unique. Um, and then after that, I sort of conversed with my parents a little bit, and they were like, "You can't only write an essay about music if you want to go into STEM." So I had to figure out a way to connect STEM and music. And I guess I got really lucky because my research with music in the brain really connected with this essay.
Mm-hmm.
So I started with the intro and then I gave some context, like you said, about like why music is important at all to me.
Yep.
And then like highlighting just like a few of my accomplishments with music and then going into like how it will connect to my future in medicine. Just to like make it more rounded, I guess.
Yeah, I think I think that what so I kind of disagree with your parents a little bit. I don't necessarily think that you like have to connect anything within your
Hmm.
main essay um to your what you want to pursue in college, because I think there's other avenues to do that a lot of times.
Hmm.
But I think in your specific case, it actually kind of works in like in order. Like everything just kind of, it flows really well, where you're talking about the role of music, and then you talk about moving to the United States. You talk about the role that music played. You then talk about your ability to demonstrate expression through songwriting. That then leads into more of an academic side of things. And then I love where you say here, music is many things to me: a form of outreach through which I can connect with others, a lens through which I can study medicine, and a tool for treatment and recovery. So it's like all of these things have built upon each other to create this this really unique narrative. I think for a lot of people, that's not like that. They might have things that are not necessarily as directly connected, but for yours specifically, you do a really great job of connecting that, and then you bring it back to kind of the analogy or metaphor, utilizing chords at the end, which is great. And so I think this gives, as a reader, it gives me a really clear understanding of, you love music, and that's played a big role, but then also what that trajectory has looked like for you over the course of time. And I feel like I now know you as an applicant pretty quickly as I review the application.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. And then talk to me about from a application standpoint. We'll get back to the essays in just a minute, but talk to me a little bit about what was sort of your plan when you start building out your school list? Did you have places that you were really interested in? Did you know that like UPenn was UPenn? Did they build UPenn for you, and you wanted to go there, or what was kind of the thought process for you?
So I fell in love with Vanderbilt very early. I thought that was it. I thought that was the school for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess, okay, so let's start from the University of Pittsburgh. Just because it's right here and there was like
Sure.
a rolling application, I decided that that's where I was going to apply first. And as soon as I got that decision, then I'd start like applying to other schools, which did end up happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I applied super early to Pitt because they also didn't require an extra essay or anything. I just had to submit my Common App.
And did you feel like, if I get into Pitt, I feel pretty good about like, if this is the likely school for me, I'm okay with it, but it gives me like some sense of like an anchor a little bit. Was that kind of what the thought process was?
Yeah, like I just kind of wanted to get an acceptance first, and then I'd like have more confidence.
You want to know you're going to college. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, so no matter what, I was going to go to college. And then to start creating my list, I was very ambitious with my list. I really wanted to go to like a top school. My list consisted of like Vanderbilt, Stanford, Penn, Columbia, NYU, Boston U, like all these top schools. And at some point I was like, I'm probably not getting into all of these schools. Maybe I should choose something that's like more of a likely like target.
Sure.
So at that point I started adding like a couple more schools to my list. Like, for example, Case Western was on there. UIUC is super hard to get into for comp sci and engineering, but I heard that like other STEM fields were slightly less hard to get into, so I was like, maybe UIUC can be one of them. Ohio State was a safety, stuff like that. But like building my college list, I kind of had like 3 safeties, 3 likelies, and like a bunch of like reaches and targets.
Okay. And then did you know you were like, did you think about early decision? What was kind of the thought there?
So I did actually early decision to Penn.
Okay.
That,
and then how did that change? Because you had said that Vanderbilt was like, I think this is like a normal thing for kids that they go to school. It's like, it was probably a nice day. Like the tour guide was friendly. You're like, oh, they made this thing for me. It's great.
Yeah.
What was the shift there for you from Vanderbilt to Penn?
Well, so my college visit to Vanderbilt was in November of 2022, and that's when I thought, like, this is the one. But then I visited schools in Boston, New York, and Philly over the summer, right before my application started. And going to Penn, there was a program called the LSM program that just sounded like absolutely perfect for me. It was the Life Sciences and Management program. It would be a dual degree with, like, a STEM major and a business major, and I thought, in case I don't actually end up going to med school, the business major would be so helpful to have. So I saw that, and then I also read a lot about Penn. Like, I did so much research on it and found out that, like, they're very supportive of women in business and women in STEM. So I thought that was also really cool. And just the city of Philly, I had been there for regattas, for rowing races before that summer. The Schuylkill River is where the Olympic rowing team practices. Cool. And I was like, I'm in love with this place. I love the city. I love the school. And like the campus itself was beautiful that day as well. It was hot, but had the perfect mix of like being in the city, but also kind of being its own thing.
Sure.
So after like all things considered, my top schools ended up being Columbia, NYU, and UPenn. And I had to choose one of those for my early decision.
Yep. So that's always a tough choice is like,
Yeah.
okay, what do I do for ED? You land on UPenn. Did you think about like theoretically if you hadn't gotten into UPenn, would you have done in like an ED2 to Vanderbilt kind of thing? Was that the plan or
That was the plan, yeah.
yeah.
Early
Okay.
decision to Vanderbilt. Other than that, I had all my like applications. By the time November 1st rolled around, I still had like most of my applications done, like most of my
Hmm.
essays, even for regular decision. I just kind of wanted to be ready, especially by like December 14th. Like if I didn't get in the pen, I wanted to be able to submit all of the others pretty soon. Like I didn't want to have a super stressful winter break or anything.
Makes sense.
So like there was a lot of like backup plans
Yep.
after UPenn,
You
but I was
yeah,
really hoping.
you want to have a strategy in place just in case things don't go the way that you want them, but you also want to be um you want to think critically about what makes the most sense for me as an applicant and give myself the best chance
Hmm.
to be successful. So I want to bring up the your UPenn-specific essays and talk
Yeah.
a little bit through those as well. So this is your essay about essentially what are you curious about and how would you take advantage of the opportunities at the arts and science colleges. And so you talk about the research that you worked on related to PTSD, and then the most important thing to me is like how do you connect these things with Penn? So talk to me about like the research of trying to find the professors and the classes, and how did you make all of these connections?
So it kind of started off as what does Penn have available to me when I get there?
Mm-hmm.
And I first like looked at the classes I'd be taking if I was gonna be a neuroscience major. And within those classes, obviously, there's like different teachers who teach these classes. And I just kind of did my research on the teachers themselves first to see like how other kids like them and what kind of research they're doing on the side. Because most professors at Penn who are in STEM fields are also doing research.
Yeah.
Um, so with that, I was able to find a lot of like brain related research. And then there's also the two classes that I named over there that
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to take. That was part of like the electives I'd be taking in my second or third or fourth year. So like not the first, but I thought there were some really interesting classes that I wanted to take that would further my knowledge on like this subject, which I was super interested in from the research. And then I guess the most important part was finding the professors who taught the classes and who had research on the side that I was still super interested in.
Yep, and also it's like it's a niche area too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's like two ways that you can look at things. Where sometimes people have like really specific areas of focus that they've done research and that they want to pursue things on, and then it aligns really perfectly with some of the work that some of the professors have done. And that's
Yeah.
like your case. Like you have like a real specific area of focus. You've done extensive work within it, and then it aligns with what is being offered at the school. And then sometimes people have like kind of general ideas, and there's not necessarily like everything's aligning in that one direction, and that's okay too. But I think if you have everything that's sort of fluid and it all makes sense for what your overall narrative and story is, it, it, it it's a easy way to kind of put the pieces together a little bit and to see the consistency throughout it, which I think you do a really good job with.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's like it's a lot better to have like a specific focus if you're going into a school, like have a specific part of the academic area of that school that like suits what you want to do in the future.
yeah, I understand
Really
that
helpful for
definitely.
these essays.
Yeah, for these essays, you're absolutely right. I think for essays where they're talking about how are you going to utilize the resources at the school, how are you, I always get the little pop up, the little finger, like when I put up my thumb, it does a little bubble.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it does. It's very important when they're asking things like how will you utilize the resources, how will you be a part of the Penn community, and so for Penn, they basically have two different questions that are pretty similar in the sense of that it's like what have you done related to our goals and then how do you plan on taking advantage of these. And so
Mhm.
this one talks more about like community and how will Penn shape your perspective and all of those things. So talk to me a little bit about kind of what your approach is on this one, because this is a little bit different from some of your other focuses.
Yeah, I think this one was actually like the hardest one to write for me. um, I like obviously I was super excited to like be able to give whatever I had to Penn, but I didn't know what it is that I have yet.
Hmm.
Um, I think the biggest thing was the a cappella because I wanted to say that I would use my music experience
Hmm.
at Penn somehow, and I've always wanted to try a cappella, so it's a lot of that. And then I guess another thing that really attracted me about Penn was their diversity and like their study abroad opportunities. So I thought that would be a good thing to put in here, as well as the rowing part, just like my experience with the Schuylkill River and like how in love with it I was after knowing that the Olympic rowing team practices there. I thought that would be a great thing to add. And then the like Sheets Wawa thing was kind of just a last minute add.
A little late addition.
Yeah.
Well,
No, it
I
was like
think
5 minutes before I submitted it. I was like, give it some
let me throw it
personality.
in there. Yeah. I also think that like this gives like because so many of your things are aligned with music and with research and like that's a lot of what your focus is. I also think that this gives a good piece of like I want to be a part of a lot of different things. And there's things outside of just the academic and music focus that I have and I've I've done crew and I want to be part of like an intercultural community. I want to promote diversity and advocacy. Music has been a part of my life. I've done it in a different way. Like I think that this is a good combination to show. Okay, I've got these couple areas of focus that I've emphasized, but I also have a lot of other areas that I'm really interested in. And I think that you do a good job, within 200 words of kind of demonstrating those things, which is not easy to do. So that to me makes a lot of sense, and I think it ties the application together really well as well.
I think this was the hardest essay to write, but
It's and the other thing
yeah.
that's hard with these, I think maybe this would be a piece of advice that you might think about with students, but I find that students oftentimes will look at those like short 150 to 200 word essays and be like, oh, I'll just write that on Thursday. And I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
that one's going to take you like a week and a half to write this thing. This
Yeah.
is, this is hard because you've got to get, so much content and context into the application, into, a short window.
Mhm.
That it's really challenging to do that. And sometimes those take the longest.
Yeah, that and like I think they're the essays that require the most research about the school. So like you need to know a lot about like what's offered in the school itself to be able to
Yeah.
write those essays and connect them with
Yeah.
yourself.
You're basically saying like, I'm knowledgeable about the school. The things that I've done align with that. And here's how I'm going to take advantage of it. But you've got to
Hmm.
do it in 200 words,
Yeah.
which is not an easy task
Right.
to take on. Cool. Well, that's excellent information. Super helpful. I always like to end just by kind of reflecting on, now that you've gone through this process and you've been really successful with it, and you're excited to go off to the University of Pennsylvania in the fall. What would you maybe thinking back a year ago now? What would be a piece of advice or your perspective that you might have that you could share with students who are maybe starting this process, or even younger students as they begin to navigate the application process in high school in general? Like, what are
Yeah.
things that maybe you feel like you wish you'd known, or that you'd share some perspective on?
So probably my biggest advice for like the application part as a whole, start it early. Just get your Common App done as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Like at least if you have that done, there's definitely some schools you can apply to that you don't need essays for, and then try not to procrastinate all the essays until right before their due dates.
I will echo
Because
that. Yes.
yeah, because as like short as some of those essays might be, they actually take forever because you never know what to write. And if you have writer's block one night and you think you're going to do it the next day, you're probably not going to do it the next day.
No.
So do everything as early as possible. Another thing would be to look at scholarships early too, because a lot of those deadlines close in like October, November, and that's when the application cycle is.
Yeah.
So if you're looking to find help to pay for college, do it early, because
Mm-hmm.
I made the mistake of not doing it early.
Yep. Definitely makes sense. And schools are not always, that's not necessarily always like a prevalent component to the
Yeah,
application and those kinds of things. So you want to be aware of like what deadlines are, and if a
right.
school has a priority deadline, what does that mean? Like, you got to make sure that
Mhm.
you kind of got all of your ducks in a row with that, for sure.
Right, yeah, that. And then throughout high school, like if you're not at the application process yet, do things that you like, because then they'll reflect in your essays. And like your colleges, despite like having a resume of like 5 million things, they can see what you actually put effort into and like what
Mm-hmm.
you actually like
Yeah.
to do, especially within your essays. Because if you do like a million different things and you don't actually like anything, what are you going to write about?
Yeah,
So,
I definitely think that's a big piece of a great piece of advice is like have a couple of main project areas or focal points within it. It's not necessarily about spreading yourself so thin, but rather like doing things to a depth or degree that is of
yeah.
significance.
Yeah, if you're doing something, do it well.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Well, that's awesome, Rita. I appreciate you taking the time and congratulations on your acceptance to the University of Pennsylvania.
Thank
We're
you.
super excited to see what the future holds for you, and I'm sure we'll hear from you in the future. And I'm sure that the students and families that are listening in found a lot of great pieces of advice and guidance. So thanks again for taking the time, and best of luck in the future. And we look forward to hearing more from many of our students in future episodes. So everybody have a great day, and we'll hear from many of you soon.